Back in 1990, we attempted this route along the Continental Divide in Wyoming from Union Pass to South Pass. It was about 120 miles long and mostly off-trail above the tree line because we wanted to stay as close to the divide as possible. Modern ultralight backpacking equipment didn't really exist yet, but the very first trail running shoes had just been invented, so we knew we wanted to do the route with trail running shoes and tarp shelters and really light packs. We made really good progress the first few days and had covered about 35 miles by the end of the second day. But then a snowstorm hit, so we dropped off the divide into a lake basin to camp in a more sheltered location. By morning, there was about 4 inches of new snow on the ground, but the skies were clear, so we continued to make pretty good progress the rest of that day. But then that night, a cold air mass came down from the north, and temperatures dropped to around 15 degrees Fahrenheit, so all that wet snow and slush just turned to ice. And it didn't take long for us to realize, after we started hiking that morning, that this was going to be a long, tedious process. Even on trail, our pace became really slow, and our food was getting low, so after a couple more days of just slipping and sliding on the ice and falling down several times, we finally bailed, walked out to the little town of Pinedale, and got a room at a motel. Back then, there were no traction spikes or crampons that were compatible with running shoes, and looking back, I think if we had microspikes with us, we could have kept moving and finished our route. Now, if you look through accident narratives from hikers and climbers and search and rescue reports, you see a very familiar pattern. Falls show up again and again as one of the main ways people are seriously injured in the backcountry, and many of those falls start with a slip on steep, snowy, or icy terrain. I've slipped on the ice so many times I've lost count, and it's resulted in a few pretty notable injuries. And while hiking in slippery conditions certainly takes a lot of energy, it's also pretty dangerous and can have serious consequences. Over the past few decades, we have seen a lot of innovation in ultralight gear, and for my own trips, traction spikes sit near the top of that list in terms of how much they've changed my experience in the backcountry. I think about their impact in 4 areas: security, saving energy, speed, and safety. Security is about how confident I am in each step. On ice-covered trails or frozen tundra or early summer snowfields, if I'm not confident in my footing, I end up shortening my stride and tensing more muscles and having to pay constant attention to the exact placement of every step, and that is mentally and physically expensive. But when I put traction spikes on in those same conditions, I get more predictable grip and my feet tend to stay where I put them, and that frees up mental bandwidth to look ahead and read the terrain instead of focusing on the next 12 inches of my route. That security then feeds directly into energy use and speed. One simple way I think about hiking movement is in how much energy it costs per mile I walk. On dry trail, that cost is relatively low, but on slippery surfaces, the cost goes up for at least 2 reasons. Number 1, I lose energy every time my foot slips and I have to catch myself. That slip changes how I move. I take smaller, more cautious steps, and I often make detours to avoid icy or snowy patches of trail. And those changes show up as higher effort and lower speed for the same distance. But when I add traction spikes, my foot tends to bite into ice and snow instead of sliding on top of it. And that means I can use a more natural walking gait instead of this cautious shuffle, and I can walk directly across short icy sections instead of picking my way around them. Over the course of a day, that means covering more distance for the same amount of effort or arriving at camp with more energy in reserve. On longer trips, it can be the difference between staying on your planned schedule or having to cut a route short because your pace has dropped too much or you became too fatigued because of slippery conditions. Security, energy, and speed all connect to safety. When traction is poor, the chance of a slip goes up, and each slip takes physical and mental energy to manage. That fatigue accumulates over time, and it saps your muscle strength and your muscular endurance. And physiology researchers have known for a very long time that when your physical condition degrades, your mind isn't far behind. So then you start making poor decisions. So you can see how not having traction when you're hiking in slippery conditions may actually be that first little cascade that can lead to injury or other types of emergencies later on. Now, it's important to realize that better traction does not remove the objective hazard that comes with snowy or icy terrain, but it does change the risk margin. Fewer steps turn into uncontrolled slips, and then when a slip does happen, it is more likely to be small and recoverable. That means you have more physical capacity left for climbing hills or making miles, and more mental capacity left for things like navigation or weather assessment or group communications, instead of spending all of your mental energy just staying upright. So when I think about traction spikes, I don't just see them as a convenience item, and for many of my trips, they are absolutely indispensable pieces of safety gear. The traction spikes that I use the most often are the Kahtoola Microspikes Ghost. The Ghost is a full coverage traction spike, and that means there are metal points under the entire length of the foot. So regardless of whether I land slightly on my heel or on my forefoot on a typical trail, some of those points are going to be engaging the surface. And that consistency is important when you're hiking on uneven, icy ground, and it's the type of consistency you can't get from some of the other ultralight traction designs like an instep crampon. But what really sets the Ghost apart from other full coverage traction systems I've used is a combination of three things: their lightweight, their low bulk, and their ease of putting them on and taking them off. At about 6.5 ounces, the Ghost is the lightest full coverage traction spike available, and it also packs small enough that I can stow it in a jacket pocket or a hip belt pocket instead of deep in the main compartment of my backpack, and this keeps them accessible. Equally important is how easy it is to transition. Because of its TPU harness instead of a steel chain harness, I can put the Ghost on or take it off while standing on the trail with my backpack still on. And in practice, that matters a lot, because if I'm walking a bare trail through a meadow and then come across an icy stretch in the trees, or I'm transitioning to a climb up and over a snowy alpine pass, I can stop for just a moment, slip the microspikes on, and keep moving. And then when I reach dry trail again, I can remove them just as easily. These transitions literally take me less than a minute. And what this all means is that I use them more often on terrain that demands them, and I take them off for terrain that doesn't. And at the end of the day, that makes me a much more efficient hiker. For me, having a system like the Microspikes Ghost expands what routes and seasons are reasonable with a lightweight kit. In early summer, I can move more efficiently across lingering alpine snowfields or easy glaciers and early season passes where the surface might be a mix of soft snow and firmer layers underneath. And then in shoulder seasons, I am better prepared for exactly the kind of melt and refreeze cycles that we experienced on that Continental Divide trip. Finally, in winter on boot pack trails, I can walk more naturally on the compacted icy sections that form in high traffic corridors, and this allows me to access terrain that I may not normally have the time to get to because of limited daylight hours in the winter. And for all of my trips, carrying traction spikes means that so much more terrain opens up to me, because I'm now carrying the tools I need to be safe and confident, especially in high alpine terrain.